Anjolie Ela Menon, one of India's preeminent painters and muralists, has been producing striking art for the past over 6.5 decades, having started to paint in her early teens. At 81, she remains an exuberant conjurer of striking, if sometimes melancholic, images. 25 of her latest works, produced during the COVID enforced lockdown in New Delhi, in India, where she lives, are now on display at New York's Aicon Gallery. Born in Asansol, West Bengal in 1940, Dr. Menon is among India's iconic contemporary artists who has jumped genres and styles, not to mention techniques and even tools. Known for her finely wrought oil paintings, a window series, her work with painted objects, computer-enabled imagery, and glass sculpture, she is also a high-selling name in the world of both auctions and private sale. Menon has held 55 solo exhibitions, including retrospectives at the National Gallery of Modern Art in Mumbai and at the Lalit Kala Academy. Dr. Menon spoke to Mayank Shah reports from New Delhi. Some part of her early interview was marred by feedback problems. As a result, I have rendered a couple of her answers myself, but in her own words. Anjolie Ela Menon. I started asking her about her fascination with crows as represented in her works such as the 2017 After the Party and the 2021 Avanti's Birthday, both of which have a lovely crow in them. She said, "The crow came into my paintings of its own volition. There was a crow years ago which used to sit on my balcony, and he insinuated himself into my paintings. I've always found the crow as an urban, extremely intelligent, half-human character and as a friend. I know there are a lot of people who think that a crow is like a bad omen, but that is surely for ravens and not crows, not the Indian crow." I also asked her about the preponderance of goats in her paintings. She said, "My studio in the Nizamuddin Basti, which is a village within an urban conglomerate that leads an autonomous life where there are mendicants, sadhus and mullahs and goat herds. My studio is located in the middle of all this. In some of the paintings you also see that I am peering into windows, into the dark interiors behind open windows, in the small tiny lanes that crisscross Nizamuddin. There is also a striking portrait of 2021 of Jesus, as well as Guru, which is 2020. I pointed out to her that their moods are in such contrast. While Guru looks meditative and serene, Jesus looks inscrutable. She said, "Well, I would say in pain. In my early works when I was in Paris as a student, I was very much influenced by early Christian art, and today I have a very large collection of icons, and they have always been influenced by the still, full frontal look of those early prophets. So the theme of Jesus, Mary, and the baby often recur in my work, even to this day." To me, the most remarkable piece on this particular exhibition, Dr. Menon, is there is an old man in window called Rafia Manzil.
Yes.
He's reading Indian Express,
Yes.
and on the front page there is a story about the farmers' protest,
Yes.
and on the back page there is a story about the surging pandemic.
Yes, indeed.
It's clear that you're making some sort of a political statement. Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, it is not so much a political statement as a statement of our lives in the last almost 18 months, where we've been locked down, and the newspaper is a very important part of our daily life. So you can't escape those little tidbits of information. But I'll say that the theme of watching somebody in a window, and
Right.
he's sitting beside the window, he has a cup of tea next to him, and this is his morning ritual. And I'm a bit like a voyeur. I like to peer into these secret spaces and observe the life that goes on behind these closed windows and doors, these open doors with the hanging curtains, children hiding behind the curtain. This is all part of life in the Basti.
Right. You've been painting since your early teens, which
Yes,
which makes your career as a painter over 6.5 decades.
absolutely.
That's an extraordinary passage of time. By now, do you think you have long become a painter with such easy muscle memory that painting is no longer a struggle?
Painting, the actual work of painting is no longer a struggle. In fact, sometimes I regret the fact that my recent work is not as spontaneous
I
as my
see.
very early work, because my hand has become more careful. Uh, I can, I don't have to dictate to it what I want to appear on the canvas. So I think a little bit of care has come into the way I apply the pigment. Uh,
But that level of circumspection, does it worry you?
Not really. Uh, I would prefer to be my wild 15-year-old self where I
Right.
splashed color on with a palette knife, regardless of whether it resembled any sort of reality.
Right. Many great painters have talked about the challenge of standing in front of a blank canvas, in your case, a board mainly.
Yes.
Have you experienced that personally? And if you have, how do you deal with it?
Yes, well, a painter dreads the day that the muse will depart, and it has happened to me once. We were in Germany for 3 years, and for some reason the muse just fled. There was no sign. I would sit day after day in front of the blank canvas, and nothing would happen. So then I asked my husband to buy me a ticket to go home, and you won't believe the minute I landed in Delhi, I did a very dramatic thing by touching the earth and breathing a sigh of relief. I went to a friend's house, it was the middle of the night, and I started to paint, and I did 20 paintings in a month. So it was something about alienation, of being in a space which was alien and not friendly. I didn't find life very friendly in Germany. People were
Right.
very circumspect, very close. It was not easy to break through to other people.
So, in a sense, you're talking about visual familiarity, as it were.
I don't know whether it's visual familiarity. It was just a feeling of being alien,
I
being
see.
not in one's creative space.
I see.
Uh, yes, but
All great art.
I
Sorry,
dread
sorry.
that, I dread that happening. But so far, I think even through this very severe lockdown, I have continued to paint these 25 paintings, and fortunately, I have been blessed.
All great artists transit through various phases in terms of what they paint, how they paint, what colors they predominantly use, or even the genres they follow. Has that been also true of you?
Yes, in the late 20s, no, in the late 19, what was it last time? 19, at the late turn of the century, I went through 10 years of being rather fed up of just putting paint on canvas. And what I did was, I did a series of experiments. Each one was a tricky one because one never knew whether this was going to succeed, either visually or in terms of the public. And every one of them did quite well. I was the first one in India, certainly, to do digitally enabled work, an exhibition called Gods and Others, also in New York. Then I experimented with kitsch, because much of what is worshipped in India are these kitsch uh, paintings which adorn every puja room in the country. And I wanted to bring that into the mainstream. So I did a series of paintings which enabled the kitsch to enter what we call high art. There was this big divide between the kitsch and the high art, and I hope I managed to cross that barrier with a quite interesting exhibition. Uh, then I was very lucky to get an opportunity to make glass sculptures in Murano. So I had two exhibitions of 55 pieces each of these sculptures, and that was a very great experience. Going to Murano and working under a maestro there, who unfortunately has now expired. Otherwise, I would love to do it again. And so on. I did a series of experiments. I also did the window series, which was then copied by hundreds of artists, I'm sorry to say, by finding an old window and replacing the panes of the window with paintings. And
Right.
this became quite the rage, and this experiment went on for nearly a decade. So I've been through a lot of different phases, but I think I come back to oil on board, which is my favorite medium.
That brings me to my next question. What's your attraction for hard surfaces that something like board would provide?
That's a very relevant question. It is because I have invented or perfected a certain technique by which I work in very thin, transparent layers of paint.
Right.
And there is a certain amount of elimination. You apply paint and then you rub it, and then apply another layer. So this is best done on a hard surface. And it's also that all that early Christian art which inspired me, the icons and the paintings by Hieronymus Bosch and so on, they were always on hard surfaces. But I have to use board because I can't find wood, actual wood panels of that size. So if I can find wood, I still paint on wood.
I see. It's interesting you should mention layering. Yours is, of course, your paintings have a lot of sheen, a lot of luster to it. Edward Monk, I believe, used to do a lot of layering as well, but his works looked rather matte finished. I think he left them in the sun too. Do you try any of that at all?
No, I don't like the matte finish.
Oh, okay.
I like to achieve the translucence, which I think a lot of people now associate with my work. Because it's all about light, and the light can only come through when the colors are translucent.
Right.
When they are opaque, like in impasto, then they're thick like in a Van Gogh painting, rather than as in a Renoir, if you understand what I mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it's interesting you should mention light because J.M.W. Turner, the great Turner, had said light is life, and which is something that Indians understand instinctively, light being life. He had interesting luster and sheen even in his watercolors. Speaking of which, do you try watercolors at all?
I'm not very good at watercolors because once you've put a splash of watercolor onto a piece of paper, that's it. You can't manipulate it in any way. And I like to be able to manipulate the pigment as I wish, which is not possible with watercolors.
True.
I know there are many Bengal artists who are brilliant at watercolors. For instance, people like Parish Mighty, who are brilliant at watercolors, but it evades me, I'm afraid.
Have you tried pastels?
Not much. I have tried pastels.
Okay.
And I think that you can get some we have an extraordinary painting by Dikash Bhattacharya, and that's full of light, and it's a dry pastel.
Right. I don't want to inject myself into this, but I'm tempted to do it for one simple reason. We're talking pastels. I've been painting for the last about 7 years, and Maybe at some point I'll send you some of my work just for your opinion. I have discovered recently that if you use vegetable oil first on either paper or canvas, just brush it up with vegetable oil, and then use pastels, it creates an extraordinary kind of sheen. You should give it a shot someday.
The only problem there could be that the vegetable oil does not dry totally.
No, it does not.
Why do we use linseed oil? Because linseed oil is the one oil that absolutely dries into a hard surface. It becomes hardened by itself. And that's why it's used in furniture, that's why it's used in painting. But ordinary vegetable oil, I don't know whether it ever dries.
No, it does not. I agree there. Because I have about 50 of those that I did recently on paper. And I put them in the sun too. But anyway, I'm digressing. How important is it for a painter to be commercially attractive? And the reason I ask is so many masters have died in utter penury.
Yes, we know so many right here. Like Tayyab Mehta, he was not in penury, but he certainly wasn't rich. And then his paintings after his death fetched millions. No, this is a complicated question in my case, because I try very hard, I not always succeed, to practice karma yoga. And one of the tenets of karma yoga is that you must not be involved with the fruits of your work.
Absolutely.
So that applies both to criticism and to praise, and of course to commercial viability. I'm not supposed to think that I have these 19 paintings there or 25 paintings in New York, and they're going to sell, and then it's like milkmaid parrot, that you imagine the best and the worst happens. You are not supposed to be attached to the fruits of that work. And I do try very hard to practice that.
That's interesting that you've internalized the essence of the Gita in a sense.
Yes.
You've spoken of having lived in France on bread and cheese, and in Sparta on oranges and spinach, not to mention Russia.
Yeah.
How has this eclectic influenced your art?
Well, at the time I didn't realize how deprived me and my friend Shama Zaidi, who we hitchhiked across Paris as young teenagers. It was safe in those days to hitchhike, so we were very lucky. But quite often the truck drivers who give us a lift would take us for a meal. We had wonderful experiences. There was a baker in Tarquinia who took us all around the caves in his van to see the Etruscan murals. So that all added to one's experience. And by and large, we were lucky, I think, that nothing terrible ever happened to us. Two young girls with a little Indian flag that we carried, and one sari between the two of us, which we would wear in turns. So those were great experiences. And once we landed in Greece, Athens was so expensive that we decided to spend a month in Sparta, where we lived in a farmhouse and did chores for our keep.
You're talking about your teenage, that means you're talking about the 50s, right? Early, late, middle 50s, something around that time?
No, 60s.
Oh, 60s.
Yes, early 60s.
Okay, so it's
60, 61, 62.
Interesting time to be there, right?
Yes, the time of the OAS, the building that we lived in, Maison des États Unis, it was bombed, and
I see.
We escaped very narrowly from getting hurt.
If Impressionism is considered one of the most defining and even rebellious movements in Western art, is there anything comparable in India? Say, for instance, how does the progressive artist troupe in India that began in 1947 compare with a movement like Impressionism?
Well, there was a certain criticism from Western critics that felt that most of the paintings that were practiced by that group were somewhat imitative of what was already going on in the West.
Mhm.
Abstract expressionism, as in Gaitonde's work, or I think the exception to this was perhaps Sousa, whose work really did not seem to imitate uh, anyone in the West.
What about Hussein?
Well, Hussein certainly strode the Indian art scene like a colossus. Uh, by the sheer volume of his output was so fantastic, and again absorbing the Indian influences and the contemporary Indian influences. It was all very well for a lot of people, particularly in Maharashtra, who did some kind of revival of early miniatures, and of course you have Germany, who uh, brought into focus the tribal and folk art of the time. But Hussein really invented himself, and he remains an enormous figure.
You had a strong association with him, right?
Yes, indeed.
What do you remember the most about him?
His wonderful sense of humor. His wonderful sense of humor. He set up my first exhibition in a Delhi garden,
Right.
and he did it all himself. He built the stands with them bamboo and rani, and he designed the invitation. He was always a great mentor and friend. And then he set up an exhibition in Bombay at the Bullabai Institute of my work, of which he took 20 paintings out of the 50 in the original show. So he was always a wonderful friend.
Is there a difference in a way a male painter constructs his work compared to a female painter? The reason I ask is because unlike most other arts, say for instance singing or even acting, where the artist is seen or heard, in painting it is generally just seen without the artist being present physically. So do you find a difference in the way the two genders paint?
Well, I always criticized, or I've said rather tongue-in-cheek sentences about Sousa's nudes, and I said that I paint nudes a lot, and my nudes are paintings of the sorority of my sisters, mothers, grandmothers, and girlfriends.
Right.
Whereas Sousa lays them bare, full frontal, angry, sort of what I'd say, a love-hate relationship with women. And there's a vast difference by the way that we regard our subject matter.
Right. And it's interesting you should mention Sousa because when I look at some of his nudes, I get the sense he's almost purging himself of that.
Yeah.
That's my sense looking at that.
Well, he was quite candid about that, apparently.
I see.
Sousa once said to me, I said, Sousa, why do you paint women with such enormous breasts? And he said, if you knew the women I know, you would realize that it was no exaggeration. So he was like that.
Yeah. To shift the gears a bit, I have just 2-3 more questions. I hope you don't mind. In a sense, Arpita Singh was your contemporary. Amrita Shergill was a different generation altogether. What kind of relationship have you had with fellow women artists?
Well, Arpita is not only a neighbor, she's a friend. And
I see.
Vastly admire her work. I have acquired quite a few of her paintings myself. And I think that she has a very, very unique approach to painting. Now, Arpita, for instance, works in very thick impasto. There is no transparence or translucence in her work, but great sense of design, and again a kind of satire that moves through a lot of her work, which is so subtle, so kind. I adore Arpita's work. And of course, Shergill has always been a great inspiration for many of us artists, not just the women, but men as well. It was one of the saddest things that happened was her early death, because even by the age of 28 she had achieved a large body of work and of splendid painting. Uh, there were some parallels that have been drawn between my trajectory and Shergill's, in the
True.
sense that we both studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and we both started off with academic paintings, which then, on our return to India, started to seek out Indian subjects. Me, very much, Shergill also in the south, her whole series in the south, and my work also. After I married someone in Kerala, the Nambudris and Brahmins came into my work.
Uh, Art evaluation is a rather quirky business, the way any piece of art is evaluated and sold. It's in fact sometimes even scandalous. The reason I'm mentioning is this: you have talked about the eight granddaddies of Indian art who sell so wonderfully.
Now that they're gone.
True, true. What about women artists? How do you think they can break into that so-called elite club?
Well, it depends on our generation now to do that, and I hope. Apparently, there was something put out just last week evaluating both me and Arpita as being the most desired right now. But time passes, and I don't know whether those who are important today will continue to be so, or
Right.
will die, or will just fade out. We need at least 50 years, I think, to make such evaluations.
Okay, yeah, but you do sell very well. I read that you have no problems in that area. Not that you are driven by it, but you do sell well.
Fortunately, yes. Projit Datta, who's running my exhibition in New York, he certainly sold the last exhibition very well. And I see a great demand. In fact, I have a lot of people phoning and wanting my work. I'm not very fast as a painter. I'm not very prolific. Though forced to paint for an exhibition, I have produced 25 works in these last 2 years or year and a half. But generally, because of this layering, which each painting needs to dry before the next layer, it's a slow process. So it isn't as though I'm producing hundreds of works.
Right.
So,
A point has been made about your paintings frequently being marked by melancholy. First of all, is it true? And if it is true, why so?
well, I'm not melancholic as a person,
Sure.
but if you live in India and you're in the least bit sensitive, you will be moved by the plight of thousands and thousands of our fellow citizens. And especially for me in the Basti, I do see poverty head on, right there in front of my eyes. And the way I'm particularly sad about the way children in this country are so melancholic. Uh, that influences my work a lot.
Right, right.
I might say that I also have a touch of Bengali melancholia. You look at Rabindra Sangeet and
Yeah.
so on. It's rather melancholy music, isn't it?
Bengalis are the French of India, I suppose, in that sense.
Absolutely.
I'm rather curious to know from you before I let you go. Do you ever wake up or dream of an image and you desperately want to paint it immediately?
Yeah, I find sometimes when I'm half asleep, my hand is moving. Actually,
Oh,
hand
really?
is moving, and I'm filling in some color somewhere. Yes, that very often happens, but I leave it to the painting to make itself. I sit in front of a blank canvas and hope that something will emerge, and often the painting makes itself.
Right.
It dictates what it wants to do.
Right. You know, the sheer physical frailties which don't seem to have affected you so far had created problems for someone like Matisse or even Monet, who had a failing eyesight. How do you think about any kind of physical discomfort while painting?
Well, so far not. I'm 81 years old now, and I am still painting vigorously.
Right.
But I look at an example like my friend Krishan Khanna, who's 96 and is painting wonderfully. Last year I finished a huge mural, 22 feet by 26 feet, and I had to climb on scaffoldings and ladders, and I was able to do that. I also did 7 huge works for the Bombay airport, where I had to climb on the scaffolding that was 20 feet high. So climbing up that ladder, I'm still able to do it, fortunately, but I don't know how long
Right.
I'll be able to do that.
And before I let you go, how do you distinguish between a painting and a mural?
A mural comes from the word mur, which is wall. So anything that's on a wall, directly on a wall, is a mural.
Right. But in terms of the technique that you employ, because the size is so much bigger, do you visualize the scale differently because you are so up close when you're painting it?
No, you have to make a maquette.
Okay. Okay.
You have to make a maquette. So I make the maquette, and it's the usual thing that we learnt in Paris when I was studying fresco, that you divide the maquette into squares.
Right.
And you enlarge the paintings a square at a time. That's how you do a big, large work.
What do you think of Diego Rivera's murals?
I think his murals are great, but I hate the way he treated his wife.
I agree. I mean, what an extraordinary painter herself. So
Extraordinary painter. I really revere her work, and I must say that I feel I went to Mexico. I also shared a studio in Paris with a Mexican painter called Toledo. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. But we were like twins. We were born on the same day of the same year.
I see.
And we looked alike because he was also an Mexican Indian.
I see.
But I went to see the Frida Kahlo paintings, and I had also painted before I ever saw them the paintings with the open heart, which Frida painted a lot. And when I saw those paintings, I was amazed. I said, in some other life we'd known each other. So I think Diego was a great painter and a horrible man.
And to conclude, in the ferment that we are living in across the world, what's your message as an artist of such consequence?
Oh, I'm very much against messages.
No, I wasn't asking message in that sense because no. That's. I'm sorry if it came across as silly, but the point I was trying to make was obviously everything surrounding you drives you.
Yeah.
We are living in time of great ferment, politically, culturally, in terms of health. See what's going on in Afghanistan, for instance.
Yeah.
So within that, as an artist, how do you articulate what's going on for the rest of the world?
Well, I don't. I've never been a didactic painter, and I have not regarded art as the right medium for propounding. Well, I'd say messages again, or ideas, political ideas certainly. But it's not that I am apolitical. I do in my life and my work, not in my paintings, very much believe in certain stands, both regarding gender, and I'm absolutely devastated at what awaits Afghan women. We have had such a terrible time, and they were slowly limping back to normalcy over the last few years. And now I fear that it will be back to the bad days of the Taliban.
Right, right. On that somewhat somber note, Dr. Menon, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been a thrill for me all the best. I sincerely hope everything sells out in New York.
Well, I hope lots of people come. That's much more important than selling out.
Yeah.
But I think with this new spike in the COVID, I
Right.
fear that many people may not actually come to see the show. But it's on for a month, so hopefully by the end of the month, I hope that we will be able to go by the end of the month.
Right.
So far it's been very sad for us not to be able to be there because of travel restrictions and no visa. The Americans aren't opening up the visa for Indians,
Right.
so we are kind of stuck. We can't travel.